everyone, and welcome to the Leftist Film Analysis Podcast. This is the third episode, and today we'll be talking about the movie Get Out, which has plenty of political themes and undercurrents and just things to discuss. If you have any ideas that we don't cover, please email us at leftistfilmpodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at
Film Leftist?
Film Leftist.
And forgot our Twitter handle.
Yeah, I did. I'm not on it as much, but
you're never on it.
Yeah, you're right. Mitchell is the Twitter aficionado, so.
Which probably explains why we're so bad at it.
Probably. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I am your host, Mike.
Guess I'm the co-host then, Mitchell.
Is that how it works? Sure. We're happy to be here, and thanks for tuning in. We're going to talk about Get Out. Get Out was released in February of 2017, written and directed by Jordan Peele, starring Daniel Kaluuya, Bradley Whitford, Allison Williams, and Catherine Keener. There's just a litany of material here to analyze politically. There's just a lot going on. I think we'll be able to dive into a bunch of different themes. A couple of themes that we're going to talk about today. Of course, the racial issues and racism in the U.S. We're going to talk about a little bit of the kind of hypocrisy of American liberalism or liberalism in general, especially like white liberalism. It's just I think there are a lot of themes in here that touch on that, and that's a really interesting topic that I don't think has been really talked about enough. And so that's definitely one we're going to cover. A little bit of socioeconomic undercurrents here, and a little bit of that worked into the film very, very well with some subtlety, but it's there. And a little bit of eugenics and how African Americans have been used by white people, especially affluent white people in this country for pretty much the entire time it has existed. Yeah. Unfortunately, and some economics, due to that, just because they are a fairly affluent white family that's perpetrating this whole thing. So we're gonna dig right in. Is there anything else you can think of that we're gonna cover that I haven't mentioned, Mitchell?
Nope. I think that's pretty much it.
All right, here we go. To start with, I'd like to reference an article by The Guardian, written by Landry. I sincerely hope that I'm pronouncing that right, and if not, please let us know, and we will correct that. But it's a really, really great article titled "Get Out: The Film That Dares to Reveal the Horror of Liberal Racism in America." And I think that's
super accurate.
That is super accurate, and good for them for tackling this, because it needs more coverage. Just a few different things in this article. Quote, Jordan Peele's critically acclaimed low-budget shocker became a surprise hit and showed viewers a terrifying look at the fractured myth of a post-racial U.S., end quote. And I think that is just a great way to put it, and super accurate.
If we could put that in an emoji, it'd definitely be the two hands up with the gleam coming off of it.
That's right. That's how we feel about this. Here's another really interesting thing that I noticed in this article. Quote, the villains here aren't southern rednecks or neo-Nazi skinheads, or the so-called alt-right. They're middle-class white liberals, the kind of people who read this website, the kind of people who shop at Trader Joe's, donate to the ACLU, and would have voted for Obama a third time if they could. End quote. And that's also just super accurate, and good for them for pointing this out. And,
Absolutely.
And going after this, because I think it's just it's something that not only does this film deal with the racial issues of the people that are already, we know, are typically racist, I guess I could say, but there's a lot of hypocrisy within even liberal politics that leftists are trying to shine a light on, and say that even within liberalism there is racism.
I don't want to say like it's more frustrating. I don't know how to put it into words, but sometimes it does feel like liberals are more frustrating than
because
than the alt-right, because or the right or whatever, because like they're so close, they're on the cusp of like having their shit together, and then it's like,
well, and they almost placate as well, and kind of patronize and say like, the Democrats are on your side and the liberals are on your side and on the side of black people in America, and that's just not always true.
They'll put a knife in your back soon as they do.
So I mean, there are plenty of examples of legislation even supported and proposed or passed by supposed liberals who claim to be on the side of these groups that are not. So unfortunately, that is something that needs to be confronted, and this article does a pretty good job of that. I would say the only thing that I take exception to a little bit here is that the article refers to this family as middle class, and I think they're fairly affluent.
Yeah, I mean they pretty much got a fucking hospital in their basement.
Well, and he's like a supposed neurosurgeon or something like that, and
that's higher up than middle class.
And then
I wouldn't say it's elite. It's that
house is pretty big, man. I don't know, but it's not what I think of when I think of middle class. But regardless,
sure,
really solid article, and I recommend that as kind of a companion piece to this film. It's really super good. And we're going to go over the plot here real quick. According to Rotten Tomatoes, now that Chris, played by Daniel Kaluuya, and his girlfriend, Rose, played by Allison Williams, have reached the meet the parents milestone of dating, she invites him for a weekend getaway upstate with Missy and Dean. At first, Chris reads the family's overly accommodating behavior as nervous attempts to deal with their daughter's interracial relationship. But as the weekend progresses, a series of increasingly disturbing discoveries lead him to a truth that he never could have imagined. This film was recognized at the Academy Awards for the Best Original Screenplay. It won the Oscar for that, and rightfully so.
Absolutely.
I was hoping it'd win more than that, but of course it was a tough year. It was a really competitive year. It's a great year for films, 2017. But I'm super happy for Jordan Peele. I think he's great, and Peele is the first African American screenwriter to win the award. And Peele tells NPR's Fresh Air's host Terry Gross that he considers Get Out to be a quote social thriller. End quote.
Isn't that like the first of its kind, pretty much?
I think so. I mean, you could go back through and probably find something that's been done like this, or something in the ballpark, or but I think it's probably going to be looked at as if this is something that continues as a genre or an idea or concept. I think that this is kind of going to be seen as the
launching point. Yeah.
So
how cool is it to create, like, not only like is the film a masterpiece and an achievement in itself, but I mean to create basically a whole new genre for films that can tackle these socio and socioeconomic problems that plague America and whatnot that's a goddamn achievement and a half.
That's right. It's great film and super impactful. There's just so much going on there, and
yeah, and there's a lot to unpack for this episode.
Right. Also, Peele told Terry Gross, quote, "It was very important to me to just get the entire audience in touch in some way with the fears inherent in being black in this country. Part of being black in this country, and I presume being any minority, is constantly being told that we're seeing racism where there just isn't any racism," end quote. But that's very good point there. I mean, especially in the South, which is, of course, where we are. A lot of people, I mean, they talk about reverse racism.
It's just not a thing.
Yeah, fuck all that. I mean, it's just, it's out there, and I think that his film, according to his words, wants to make an impact on that and kind of push back on a lot of that stuff, and super happy about that, because that's just a whole bunch of bullshit.
Absolutely. Anybody that any white person that claims immediately upon such a accusation, those that say, "Oh, I'm not racist. I'm the least racist person," like fucking Trump. He's the least racist person, and so is literally every other.
When he called my black person, he called someone look at my black person in an audience one time at a campaign.
Oh God, that's why he said
like
that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I just heard the quote about.
He basically was like, I have a black friend in the audience. That's the equivalent.
What a fuck up he is.
A black friend. And it's just, I'm not racist. I have a black friend.
Yeah, anybody that like spits that out as a reaction to being accused is probably super fucking racist. They just don't want to.
Yeah. And hell, they may not even know it at this point.
Yeah, I mean,
unbelievable.
I've run into so many people that are like, "Oh, I'm not racist," and then they'll say the most racist thing and not think anything of it.
Right. There is a casual racism that exists, and also is something that needs to be talked about more. And that's another topic that we'll get into here. Is casual racism, I guess, and it's those comments and those things that people think are innocent. They may not necessarily be intending to call out some sort of group of people or anything, but they do, and it's just done out of ignorance, and it just shows that racism is so ingrained in so many of the cultures of the United States, and it's just,
especially down in the South, it's hard as fuck to escape it down here, right? Because like so many stories to start off with like, oh, this black person at Kroger,
right?
What does that matter? Like, why can't you just say, like, this lady or this man or...
Yeah. It's just it's ingrained, that there's a lot of that. And but this film does a lot to kind of break that shit down and put it under the microscope and reveal it for what it is, which is mostly just ignorance and unfounded bullshit. So let's start by tackling the racial issues, because those are obviously the most that's what it's centered around. So we'll just say broadly the racial issues or racism in the U.S.
I just want to throw in real quick that the Black Socialists of America did an excellent thread on March 22nd on Twitter, dissecting the term and concept of white privilege. I just want to read a couple of the posts that they made from it. They start off with saying, quote, "When the first Africans arrived in Virginia in 1619, there were no, quote, white people there with them, but, quote, British people. According to colonial records, there wouldn't be, quote, white people there for another 60 years. The hands of imperialism extended from ethno-states, not racial groups. Then they go on to ask, other Europeans coming to America? Poorer Europeans coming to America? Potential for poor and working class solidarity? Oh no, the ruling class Europeans thought. Let's construct a racial hierarchy. The psychological wage we give whites will divide the proletariat.
Very interesting. Very accurate. Very thought-provoking. Super important. I think that's great, and I think that makes a lot of sense, unfortunately. And I think that still ties in very well with the themes of this film.
Yeah.
Peele told the New York Times, quote, I was making the movie in that period when Trayvon Martin was killed. What originally started as a movie to combat the lie that America had become post-racial became a movie where the cat is out of the bag, and now we're having this conversation. I realized I had to shift it a little bit. It became less about trying to create wokeness and more about trying to offer us a hero out of this turmoil, to offer escape and joy, end quote. I think that's a really interesting take, and that's not something I've thought about or really experienced as a white male of some privilege because of that. I didn't think about their, Chris, the character in the film, Daniel Close's character in the film, being some sort of, figure or heroic figure that could come out of all of this tragedy and all the awful shit that's going on involving racism in the U.S. So I think that was really an interesting thing that he said, and really an important point. So initially you see they are Rose Armitage, his girlfriend, and Chris are headed to her parents' home, and they're pulled over, right?
Yeah.
And almost immediately Chris is asked for his ID, and initially at least I was kind of rooting for Rose in the way that she shut him down and was just basically told the cop to fuck off, which we will learn later she's not so cool, but
no, and even that instance, it's a double-edged sword, because we think initially she's wanting to protect Chris, but actually she's more wanting to protect herself, because as we learn what the family does, the police won't be able to interfere because they have no knowledge of who Chris is.
Right. There's it's been said that was done to make sure there was no paper trail.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not that the cops would help.
Right.
A lone black man against a whole middle class family of fucking white people.
Yeah. They've got to be upper middle class. I'm comfortable with upper middle class.
Yeah.
At least, maybe they are middle class for upstate New York.
Maybe that's a good point.
Maybe,
they do have
shit, I don't know. We're in Memphis.
So, yeah, we're in the South.
And I love Memphis, but
absolutely.
But there's probably a difference in upstate New York. So who knows? Let us know if you have some knowledge on that issue. But yeah, there's just institutional racism being touched on here, and finally they get to the house. They talk about hitting a deer. I don't know what deer represent in the film, because they're always popping up. What's that about? You have any ideas?
Not a clue. I forgot they were a thing.
Yeah, well, they hit the deer, and then They get to the house, and Dean Armitage, the dad, Rose's dad, is just complaining about how overpopulation of deer, and he's super happy they hit a deer. The man doesn't like deer, and I don't know. And then later on, in the end of the film, spoiler alert, when Chris kind of wakes up after being knocked out, and we're skipping ahead, but hang with us. He's tied up to a chair, and he's about to watch that indoctrination video, and they have him staring right into the eyes of a deer's head on the wall.
Do you think the by overpopulation, him saying the overpopulation, do you think he's saying it's a colloquial for the deer is like black people?
I don't know. If anyone has any theories on that or knows anything about that, hit us up on Twitter, because I kind of wondered about that. I don't have any ideas really myself, but there's got to be something, right?
Sure.
So.
I forgot it was that.
It's prevalent, man.
Yeah, now that you say that, they were super prevalent throughout the movie. I didn't pay any attention specifically to the deer. I mean, they're just deer, but maybe there was a...
Yeah.
Because normally in movies, when something pops up more than once or twice, there's usually some reason behind it.
Well, and in this film particularly, there's so much foreshadowing.
Yeah.
There's just so much early on that is alluded to that, later on is revealed to be something of meaning, especially on a second or third viewing of the film. You really start to see a hell of a lot more come together and stuff that you didn't notice before.
Right.
So, maybe something there will come to light. But anyways, so they're introduced and to her parents, and they find themselves in the backyard, sitting around a table, and Georgina, I guess, is kind of a housekeeper type, is employed by the Armitage family, which is a little strange because so is Walter, I believe his name is, the gardener. Or groundskeeper. I'm not sure what the right term is, but he it looks weird to Chris, as it probably should, that this affluent white family is employing these African American folks to serve them, and it's just very, very antiquated, and there's a lot of racial undertones there, and Chris picks up on this, and that leads to the now famous line of
I would have voted for Obama for a third term.
Right, and so
spoiler, you would have been voting for drone bombings for little children
and neoliberal status quo, but
we digress.
Yeah. So he makes sure to say that, and that's part of that. What we'll dig into in a little bit on the white American liberalism and its hypocrisy.
To try to appeal to...
Right, and explain away the racial tones, I guess, of what had just been experienced by Chris, and so super awkward too, and but they really Jordan Peele did a great job of making sure that came across on the film, and the actors in that scene as well. Bradley Whitford and Daniel Kaluuya did a great job. It's iconic now. It's going to remain a thing. But anyway, so Georgina is pouring them drinks at the table in their backyard, and ends up overpouring, I believe it's Chris's drink, and is kind of almost in like a trance, kind of gets zones out,
Yeah, just
and after she catches herself, she is told by Missy Armitage, the mother, Rose's mother, to quote, get some rest, right? And that comes up later too, because you'll notice that after each of these weird little instances that a lot of the people the people in the film have, they'll say, either Dean or Rose will say, get some rest. Right? After it's I guess it's kind of a way to put them back in their, in their trance or in the hypnosis or whatever. But we'll get to that in a little bit. We'll dig into that a little more. So Georgina is introduced there, and she's a really interesting character. That becomes even more interesting. But that night, when Chris and Rose return to the guest room or whatever, or Rose's old room, when they're just the two of them, Rose is apologizing, and she's saying that, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that they were going to say these things, or that I didn't realize that they were maybe casually racist, right? So, she's apologizing for this and acting as if she knows now that how weird it was, and the way that they treated Georgina and told her to, go get some rest, and for how everything went down and how weird it was, and because, for example, at dinner that evening, what started out as a casual conversation turned very strange.
Super.
Due mostly to her brother Jeremy. They were talking sports a little bit, and he went into this thing about how if Chris pushed his body, he could be a machine or something, something like that in MMA, which was super weird. And Jeremy is played by Caleb Landry Jones, who does an excellent job, and was also read in 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, and he's super good, and he plays this character, Jeremy Armitage, really well, and he's just a creep, just a weirdo.
Yeah, super creepy.
And so he makes everybody super uncomfortable, and just turns from very casual dinner to very uncomfortable, and Chris is showing that at this point. Essentially, Rose is apologizing for all this, and she asks the question, how are they different from the cop? Right?
Right.
That's super interesting, because it highlights that that kind of liberal, kind of hypocrisy, where the cop was more, I guess, blatantly targeting Chris for harassment,
as they mostly do.
Yeah, but the family, she was realizing, or acting as if she realized, that her family was kind of doing some of the same things, but in a casual, kind of more under the radar way, which is super, just as fucked up and weird. But it's that ingrained shit where you have these racist ideas, even if you're not, if you don't claim to be racist, or you're not called out as being a racist on a regular basis. It's just such a thing, part of the culture that she recognizes that, and I think that's super interesting.
But it still ends up. It's wild how like she knows all of this, but it's still basically all an act.
It is all an act. Yeah, I mean it's.
But she's right. She's on the money with all of her assessments.
Right, which kind of gives you like a false sense of like security in what she knows. Before she turns on him.
That's probably intended by Peel as because I mean most liberals know that like what goes on with black people is shitty.
Yeah.
But they know everything and they're just like, we can't be bothered by it.
Yeah, and a lot of them just choose to either they don't go far enough in their ideas to fix all of this and supplant institutional racism and the prison industrial complex and all these things that disproportionately affect African Americans by design,
right?
Or they willingly ignore it.
So many of them are like, yeah, I unequivocally support social justice for black people, but Black Lives Matter? No, that's too extreme for me.
Right. Or they're not the All Lives Matter crowd where they intentionally try and turn it around, but you just don't really see them supporting Black Lives Matter either,
Right.
And, if they support it at all, it's just super quietly and not enough.
They don't have any. There's a street in Memphis on McLean that this one house has that thin blue line bullshit as a sign in their front yard, and then directly across the street is a Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
So I thought that was super cool.
Yeah.
I figure the BML or BLM sign it has to be a direct response to that thin blue lives shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just a really good example of the culture here,
Yeah.
Right across the street, somebody with completely different or even diametrically opposed ideas.
Yeah.
But
good
for that person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keeping up the fight and fuck that blue line bullshit. But also, it's worth noting that before Dean Armitage tells Chris he would have voted for Obama for a third term, just going back a little bit, he explains away the reason for them hiring these people for their service is that they were employed by his parents, I guess, and he didn't want to let them go after they died. So it's almost as if he's providing some sort of service or some sort of he's explaining it away, but also saying like, I just couldn't let him go, I just couldn't fire him, and as if like almost to me it's kind of like crass in a sense, because it's like taking advantage of the fact that of their kind of socioeconomic situation,
sure,
and retaining their services, and almost patting himself on the back for doing so. But,
what a good job we've done.
But that's the way he explains it away, which of course turns out to not even be the case. But
right.
But it's a super interesting scene. Later on that night, Chris goes out to smoke. He has a pretty creepy and jumpy run-in with both Georgina and Walter.
Mm-hmm.
He's out there. He's about to light up his cigarette, and he sees Walter, who is a big guy, running right at him like full speed.
Yeah,
which was alarming.
Fuck all that. I'd run my ass.
Yeah,
off.
I mean, and he just stood there. Chris just stood there and kind of dodged him, let him run by. Yeah, I'd have been out of there. But that was really alarming and super weird. And then he turns around, and Georgina's character is just staring right out the window, at the back door, the glass in the back door, and she's just staring right out there. It's kind of creepy, and then she walks away, and Chris is just like,
I want to make a quick little.
What the fuck's going on? You know, it's weird. Go ahead.
Just a quick little. I thought Jordan Peele didn't use these like overt sounds like most typical horror movies do, like the big ass jump scares as they're called. He uses these subtle little chimes or just a little ding as
it's super cool.
It's not overt. It's just real subtle, but enough to startle you just enough.
Yeah, and they kind of remind me of like Hitchcock type.
Yeah,
Hitchcock
right.
Type scenes paired with that type of music and sounds. Super cool.
Anyways, back to
sure. No, good point. I mean, it's because it happens in that scene too. Both
as
times
he's
like
looking up to see Georgina, there's that little quick little sound, and I thought those were a nice touch as opposed to the blatant jump scare noises that most people use.
Yeah. So he walks back in, and there is Missy Armitage, the mother, sitting in her little office area, I guess, with like a cup of tea, and she asks him to come on in and talk with her, and he sits down across from her, and this begins one of the most interesting scenes, maybe one of the best scenes in the film, but there are a lot of them. This is where Chris is hypnotized. Now, we should have mentioned that at the table in the backyard earlier in the film, when Chris meets Georgina, Dean and Missy ask him if he smokes, because he's kind of just acting as if he's like got a nervous habit or something, I guess, and they pick up on it and they ask about that, and they offer to have Missy hypnotize him and fix it, have him not smoke anymore, because that's what she did for Dean years earlier. And he turns him down because he's kind of weirded out by it, rightfully so. Anyways, so now he comes back into the house that night after the first day of all this weird shit, and Missy catches him and has him sit down across from her, and again it starts casually, just like dinner, and just like the conversation earlier. In the backyard, but then it moves pretty quickly into her asking about his mother, and earlier he said his dad wasn't in the picture, but his mother, he was raised by a single mother who then died when he was young. So you have to imagine that kind of also there's some socioeconomic things, I guess, highlighted here, because she pressures him kind of into opening up, and it's a really well acted scene by Daniel Kaluuya, and he opens up about how the night that his mother died, he was at home alone watching TV, and she was coming home from work, and so that kind of highlights the lifestyle, I guess, of and the conditions in which single mothers have to be at work.
Sure,
and
yeah,
kids can
absolutely.
just have to be home alone. And
we should also mention, the whole time she's like stirring her.
Yeah,
she's stirring her teacup spoon around, which is
it's making this little obnoxious clanging kind of noise.
Yeah, and that's the subtle version of the hypnosis or whatever.
Right. That's, I guess, what is. And I believe he makes a joke about dangling something in front of him or something to hypnotize him, and she says, no, that's not how it works, or something like that. And, we don't know it yet, and he doesn't know it, but she's using that sound to
work her way in.
Yeah. And before he knows it, she has put him in what is referred to as the sunken place, which is, I think, is really an integral part of this whole thing.
She tells him, fall into the floor, and at first you're like, what? And then the the camera work for...
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, the camera work for when he goes into the sunken place is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, he's just falling through just kind of a dark, almost like
void
empty space. Yeah, void kind of like area, and it's you can see the look on his face and the pain and emotion, and he's it's super interesting, and it must be maybe some sort of, at least I think it may be some sort of metaphor for the position in which a lot of, I think, white supremacy and white people have put black people in the country.
Yeah,
and,
the marginalized area that,
right.
No matter how far not far, no matter how hard they try to scratch and claw their way out of it, there's just no way out, and there's unfortunately nothing they can do about it but just sit back and watch themselves be victims of all of this this racism and problems that will seemingly plague America for still years to come.
Right. And in reference to the sunken place, I think everybody wanted to know what that was about, and Jordan Peele must have had a lot of questions about that, because in March, I believe of 2017, after the film was released, he tweeted, quote, "The sunken place means we are marginalized. No matter how hard we scream, the system silences us," end quote. And so that's right there from his own words, and that's just a super interesting metaphor, I guess, and way to work that in and really put a visualization to that feeling for people who, for white people, I guess, or non-marginalized groups of people who don't necessarily understand or can relate to that. That's a really strong visualization for what that must be like, and I just think that's super important. So, I mean, again, just kudos to Jordan Peele, because, man, he made that come across just expertly.
Absolutely.
So while they're, again, going back to the one of the initial conversations in the film between Chris and Rose and Rose's parents, Dean and Missy, they say that there's going to be this get-together, this event, this kind of like elite bullshit, affluent white people party, country club kind of people, I guess.
Yeah, because naturally the weekend the sole black guy comes to the white family, there's going to be a get together of all white people to make him feel even more uncomfortable.
Yeah, which on second viewing is a little bit convenient, but the first time you see it, Rose is just like, oh, I didn't, no, it's not. It couldn't be this weekend, and they say it's an old family tradition,
right?
But they say, yeah, you just forgot it is this weekend, so that next day they attend this strange party where the first guy, I think, that they talked to, I think his name was Gordon. He was a former pro golfer, and he makes sure to say that he knows Tiger Woods,
Oh yeah, you got to relate to him somehow.
Which is kind of, that's just kind of one of those weird, awkward, casual, racist things that people do. But then he says, "Let me see your form, Chris. Do you play golf? Let me see."
Super uncomfortable.
Because and you think at first he's just being weird, and then you realize he's, I don't know what term to use. Any of them sound awful, but it kind of shopping for
feeling him out, measuring him up,
body, to later transplant his brain into, so he wants to see if he'll be good at golf, so he can relive all of that.
Hit the greens.
Yeah, so super weird. And then another lady whose husband is elderly and I believe he's disabled or something. This lady is feeling up on Chris's arms and
as an
shoulders
introvert
and stuff,
that'd be my first sign. Fuck all this, I'm out.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely at this point, he's like, are these white people just this fucking weird, or like is something going on? But so then he's walking around and he meets, or rather, he sees another black person there, and he walks up to him. And he says, something like, good to see somebody else here, kind of relating, I guess, referring to the fact that they're the only two black guys there,
yeah.
right? And at the time, he meets Andre, or who is referred to as Logan at the time, I believe, who's dressed like an old white guy and acts like an old white guy, and makes Chris all that more uncomfortable, right? And
yeah, he even does the mistakes, the fist bump, and grabs his fist
right
instead of
and then,
total white guy move.
And then, speaking from experience, and then an older white lady walks up and kind of escorts Logan or Andre away from Chris, so as not to be weirder, so things don't get any stranger. But so that's super weird. And then I noticed it on this second or third time I watched it. I didn't notice this at first, but she leads him to a group of other white people over here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Logan / Andre does this strange kind of spin around where he steps back. She motions towards him with her hands,
mm-hmm.
as if to show him off, and then he steps back and does a spin around kind of thing, as if saying,
hey, look at this.
Yeah, like,
what? No, I didn't notice that.
Look at my new form. You know what I'm saying? Like,
holy shit, no,
yeah,
I didn't.
Yeah, man, I didn't notice it the first time either. But I noticed that that's where she takes him to, and then she's basically showing off. It worked.
He's showing it off as well.
Right, because he's not Andre anymore. He's Logan now, even though Andre's in there somewhere.
How fucking creepy.
Yeah, so watch this film a couple times. You'll see some shit like that. But then Chris walks away and is kind of just photographing different things, and he stumbles upon Jim Hudson, who is an art gallery owner, conveniently, and also conveniently has heard of Chris and his work. He tells him he used to be a photographer, but now he's blind. And so his assistant helps him, describes all the work to him and helps him figure all that out. And it seems like they bond a little bit because Jim Hudson says that the other people are ignorant and they just don't know any better and all that stuff. And you think Chris may have found a little bit of relief in that scene.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, then Chris goes, but that'll come back. That'll come back around for sure. Then Chris goes up to his room where they're staying and realizes that his phone's been unplugged.
Right.
Hasn't been charging. But he calls his friend Rod, who is house sitting for Chris and taking care of his dog while he's away.
Probably the best friend in movie history.
Yes, Rod is super cool, and Rod works for the TSA, and he has his suspicions. Rod does, after being told about what's going on here. So he's saying all this. Chris is telling him what's been going on, and Rod's like, that's like they're bringing black people there, and like, it's a sex slave operation or something. I mean, like,
naturally,
he's like super. He already has a theory, and it's remarkably prescient. It's really he's on it already. Rod is remarkably already onto him before maybe anybody else.
He's very aware of.
Yeah. So then the phone dies because it hadn't been charged very well, and Georgina then comes in they have this weird scene where weird in a really good way, but Georgina is just acting really strangely, and she explains that the phone just came unplugged when she was, dusting or something like that, or wiping the table down, and Chris says something like, "Hey, he's trying to relate to her, and he says like he's trying to, I guess, also find some like solidarity in that place, and says like, I just get nervous when too many white people are around, right?" And she locks up and just kind of freezes up, and she smiles really big, and it's super creepy, and she begins to like tear up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she sounds super scripted, and she's just like, no, not at all, that's not my experience at all.
Yeah.
And that's a super awkward scene, super weird, but just expertly done again. And so one thing after another, Chris is just really starting to figure out something's going on.
Yeah.
So then
something is afoot for sure.
Definitely. So then he walks back outside, and everybody's kind of staring at him, and says, and one of he's introduced to a couple more people, and one of them asks if he feels that the African American experience puts him at an advantage or a disadvantage, something to that effect, which is another super awkward and strange thing to do, and just puts him on the spot. And he then tries to, Andre is there, Logan/Andre is there, and he tries to bring him in to the conversation, and says, "Hey, I'm going to let you take this one," kind of, and of course Logan says something scripted, something
Mm-hmm.
that he's supposed to say, right, and something about how he doesn't get out of the house much anymore. And then Chris is trying to discreetly with his phone take a picture of this person because of the strange vibe he's getting from him. And when he does, the flash goes off. And Logan then kind of freezes again, just like Georgina did, and his nose begins to bleed, and you see him almost kind of snap out of it, whatever it is, the hypnosis or trance or whatever, and he looks at Chris and just says, "Get out, get out,"
Starts
which is
running at him.
Yeah, which is another one of those like really big important scenes in the film, and he just starts yelling, "Get out, get out," and he's like trying to warn him, and that is a super good scene, but super creepy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of then everything kind of turns, This is kind of that kind of catalyst for everything shifting, and Chris being like, okay, something's fucking wrong. And I think that is super interesting, and then after that, Chris and Rose go for a walk, and Logan is taken back to Missy's office,
Mm-hmm.
and put back under, I guess,
Right, yeah.
And then again, it comes up right when he comes out. Dean Armitage says, go home and get some rest. The "get some rest" thing comes back up, which again must be some sort of phrase that they use to put them under, or something.
Like a buzzword or something.
Yeah, something like that. Kind of like the opposite of what the Flash was, which kind of like woke them up, or I don't know. What would you say the Flash kind of symbolized? Maybe like a shocking them back into like their reality, kind of like a quote unquote wokeness, as Jordan Peele used earlier in
Yeah, I guess I thought of it as how like it's like the cell phone and like there's so much. I wanted to say like it represented the cell phone being the use of the camera or whatever being like how like we're all this like information and
the way that like technology
technology is
furthered.
like in our hands and how like
and it's the way that like a lot of these like a lot of these police brutality cases have been caught on video and stuff because of cell phones. And there's, I don't know, maybe there's a way that technology and cell phones and stuff like that can be used as kind of like a tool to
wake people up and see the world around them for how it actually is.
Right.
I kind of stumbled around with that. I apologize, but it's such a deeper way to get around it and like get it. It's a pretty deep message, if that's what it is intended to be.
Yeah, I think it's really, really excellent, and even if it wasn't intended, it's kind of it's hard to tell at this point what is intended and what is not in this film because there's so many layers. But regardless, I mean, if people are getting this out of it, I mean, it's just that's art, and that's the again, we don't tell anybody what things are supposed to be about or anything like that, but that's what we get out of it. So I mean, that's the art was effective on that basis. So there are just a lot of themes when he is finally kind of catches on and he finds these photographs in Rose's room after being told by Rod that the Logan person, after he sends the picture that triggered that whole thing to Rod says that's Andre Hayworth, I believe, and he, we knew him through somebody else, and Chris says, oh yeah, that is, I do recognize him, and so what's going on? Maybe it is, he goes back to his sex slave theory, and
it's got to be that
pretty close, and so then he says, Chris says, okay, we're getting the fuck out of here, and he alerts Rose, and then she goes, she walks away for a minute, and Chris finds these pictures of all of the other black people that she's brought home,
right,
and one of them is Georgina, one of them is Walter, and he figures it out. And then he tries to get out of there. Missy, the mother, uses the
old teacup,
to knock him out and put him back under, and he wakes up tied to a chair, and he watches this video, which basically is just like this eugenics thing of about how, just the differences of how white people are superior in this way or that way, and put in the body of a black person would benefit them this way. I mean, it's just this awful shit. And and then he realizes it's been a dynastic kind of family fucking business or whatever. And by neurosurgeon, Dean Armitage is actually taking the brain out of these white people and putting them in to these black people that Rose is bringing home, and he realizes that Jim Hudson, the blind photographer guy, is the one who he won the bid or the bingo or whatever the hell that was earlier, and now he's about to get his brain in his body, and from that point on, he essentially he tries and thankfully successfully does escape the situation, and Rod is there to save
T.S.
the damn
motherfucking
day.
A.
Yep.
Look at him go.
So, there's just a lot of those. It's a hell of a film, and there's a lot of themes and just undercurrents and things to discuss. The liberal hypocrisy is one thing I just want to touch on one more time before we wrap this up. There's just that facade of the American experience that Jordan Peele kind of touched on when in the quotes at the beginning of the show, where there are white liberals who want to pretend that we're post-racial, and things like that, and it's just that's not doing anybody any good.
Nope.
It's just ignoring. It's choosing to ignore it, and there's something to the fact that this whole operation was generational and dynastic in the way a lot of wealthy white families have seemed to control power in U.S. politics as well. You got the obviously the Kennedys and Clintons and things like that, and Bushes, and I think maybe whether it was meant to happen or not, that alluding to those dynasties and those wealthy kind of elite white families and their control of businesses or politics in the U.S. is something that was really interesting, really important too. So
Speaking of specifically the Clintons, do you think that Dean and Missy was somewhat of a comparison to because during Clinton's, or specifically Bill's, Hillary never got one. Good job, America. Not that I'm defending her by any means, but would have been better than what we have. Anyways, Bill was extremely harmful to black people in his 8 years of presidency. And
it seems that he, in a sense, people say that he related to the black experience, I guess, or African American experience, and
he could play the saxophone.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I guess, patronizing, or in that sense. But it's like, because of where he came from, and he came from Arkansas and from relative poverty, and but regarding crime and he deregulated Wall Street. He's his crime bills and different things that disproportionately would, or his crime agenda all around, I guess we should say, disproportionately affected minority groups.
Right. He fucked up welfare. We all know about the 13th Amendment, that slavery is illegal, basically, unless you're in prison. Mm-hmm. So that jacked up the incarceration rate of black people.
And it just disproportionately affected the entire community. And so I think that's interesting. I think it could be maybe like a, whether it was intentional or not, could be some sort of, could be some sort of parallel between those types of families.
Right, because sure. There's a certain, there's definitely a like an incarceration, because when Chris is finding out about this eugenics program that they're doing, that he will still be somewhat conscious of what's going on.
Right. That's a good point, but he'll be basically
he just can't do anything about it, which is what a lot of people, black people in jail, are often experiencing. Even if they didn't really do anything worth deserving being in jail, like being addicted to fucking drugs, which our own country pretty much set them up to be hooked on. And
there's just a lot there, and those are really great points. I think we're going to wrap it up. Hopefully everybody out there is enjoying it, and if you have any thoughts of your own on this issue, please hit us up on Twitter at Film Leftist, or email us at leftistfilmpodcast@gmail.com. Again, we appreciate you. We will be our next episode will be on Black Panther, so that should be really fun to talk about.
I'm super excited about that one.
Yeah, great film. Anything else?
Nope, that's it.
Great. Well, we appreciate you. We would love a review and rating on iTunes if you manage to find us over there. And we appreciate you. We're signing off.